to my channel. Welcome back. We are doing my January wrap-up. I know it's late for usual wrap-ups, but listen, I was going through some stuff and I did want to film this earlier, end of the month, beginning, but things happen. Anyway, I was also on bed rest for a week. That's over. Feel a lot better. So I have my notebook. I started to, well, I do put it on Storygraph and you can follow me by the same name, okay? I also like to have it written down just so that I know what dates I have. My Storygraph has how many stars and like where I categorize them. That's the only big difference. And then you can also find my full reviews on my website, which is disneycoffeeandbooktalk.com. You can also find me on Tome, Tome. Here is my profile, so you guys can check it out. Anyway, January was quite the month. Within 31 days of January, I managed to read 39 books. Yeah, that was something. I don't know how I did it. It's the most amount of books I've ever read in a month. And when I read, well, I could go from 0 to like the most I read was like 34. So it is pushing it just a little bit more. But I pretty much had stopped watching TV and movies for the most part. I do have some things that if you guys follow me for my Disney content, I am watching that stuff, but I stopped watching like other things. It's been more of a chore. Don't get me wrong, I love my Disney stuff, but that's been feeling more of a chore than like me being more excited about watching it and doing the work. So I have a ton of movies in the process of editing. Just keep that in mind. All right, so that's been quite the intro. A lot longer than I planned. The first book that I finished, because granted I started it in 2024, was Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. Now this was a phenomenal read. This is true crime. It's about the Osage people. I've done my review already, so you can check it out. By the way, I meant to say this. Any video review that I've done here, I will link down below, and I'll list all of the books for you guys, so you'll have an easier time in the description. And I'll link where the review is, and as I make more review videos, you'll have access to come back to those. Anyway, 5-star read, definitely recommend. Then I read My Dear Henry by Kaylin Barron. This is YA fantasy, Black author, queer, absolutely loved it. It's a Jekyll and Hyde remix. Another phenomenal. I've been on something with those 5-star reads lately. Let me tell you. Okay. Then I read So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo. I don't know if I pronounced her last name right. I feel like I didn't, but I apologize for that. This was a great read, nonfiction. It's about race, written by a Black woman, her experience, and what we can do to combat racism. Like, it's geared towards white people specifically, but you know, she has a great reminder that even if you read the books, even if you watch the movies and you support, you know, marginalized communities, there are always works to be done, right? And it's a great reminder, you know, looking back now, you know, when I was reading it, she made a point that said, you know, even if you've read the book and it comes back up, or you feel like you know the information, right? It doesn't mean that you can't listen to it again. doesn't mean that you can't take another lesson from it. And that is a really great reminder, right? So even though me personally knew a lot of this information, it was great listening to, majority of the books I read are audiobooks, by the way. It was great hearing that. And I suggest if you are on a anti-racism, combating bigotry in any way, decolonizing your brain, all that sort of thing, I do recommend having a journal and not just writing out like what book you read, but your thoughts and your opinions and how it made you feel, because there is a lot. That is something that I learned, and I have not read the book, but it's coming. There's a book, now I can't remember the book's name, but it's by Regina Jackson and Sarah Rowe, two amazing women who I had the pleasure of learning from over the last almost 10 years now, about 10 years. It was right around the time that the first presidential election with Trump was around. Pantsuit Nation, that's where we started. Shout out to you all. And then I forgot the name of, they splintered off, and there's been a lot of information, and I had the honor of not just these two wonderful women, but there was a group of, women of color specifically that were sharing resources and having the conversations, and we really broke down a lot of things, and I take a lot from that, and I honor these women who really just put a lot, gave their, I want to say, hearts and soul to this. I wish I could remember every single person's name in that group. I really do. I remember some of them, like Lacey Watkins, like I said, Sarah Rowe, Regina Jackson, were just three of the women that I can name off the top of my head, that I honestly had the pleasure of learning from not in person, online, but real time during this. So anyway, I'm going off on a rant. My point was one thing that I took from them was to journal your thoughts, right? To work through your emotions, to sit with your uncomfortability while you're working through things. And we are going to make mistakes, right? No one's perfect. And you may get called in, called out, whatever you want to call it. We can have that discussion at a different time. But to not take it so personally, in the sense that, we were kind of conditioned this way. Like we were, there's a lot to it. I think I'm just going to save this conversation for a different video, honestly, because I do want to share a lot of the resources that I've gone through and found. But my point being, just journal it, have the discussions with fellow white, folks, if you're white, or within your community, and know that if you are not part of a marginalized community, we always have work to do to combat that bigotry towards them. So keep that in mind. All right. Then I read Immortal Dark by Tigis Germa. This was another 5-star read for me. This was dark romance by a Black author. Fantasy. Spicy. The band, I would say like 2-star on this, not even, maybe like 1-star on the spice. When I say 1-star, I mean like there were like very little bit of spice, but the banter, that was what got me. And there is going to be a sequel. I need it. I want it. I had seen this all over TikTok by majority of my mutuals. They loved it. I still want a physical copy of this book. I had been looking everywhere for it without having to order it online, but I'm at that point where nowhere locally, because I'm rural, carries it, so that's gonna be on my to buy list, but definitely recommend. Okay, then I grabbed The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. Highly recommend. I'd already done my video on this. 5 stars. It was emotional and sad and powerful, and really, you know, even though I grew up and live in the North, doesn't negate the racism or the history. You know, there's still racism up here, but the history of, you know, slavery even in the North, right? There were still plantations up here. And, you know, in my small town, we have part of the Underground Railroad. We have a stop here. And it made me think about that, right? There was a whole big scene that I talked about in my review where one of the stops that she was on, and I think she was in like Virginia at that point, so it wasn't quite the North yet, where the stop overlooked the town square, and she was stuck there for a long time, but she saw every Friday these, you know, these celebrations, and it made me think about what our town does every, you know, Friday in the summer of July, and how close our stop is to that town square. That's what it made me think of, and I have that conversation in my review. Next, I read Twisted Love by Anna Hong. Another dark romance, phenomenal. I am so excited that this is going to become a TV series. I really hope they do the cast justice. Then I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Again, 5-star read. Did my review. Phenomenal book. Talks about, you know, plagiarism and racism and classism and all sorts of things. You know, R.F. Kuang has gone viral for pretty much every book she's written. She is a master writer. I will give it to her. Okay? Like, I'm gonna give it to her. Then I read Black Fatigue by Mary Frances Winters. This was another nonfiction written by a Black woman talking about racism that she faces, especially with the political climate, the way it is, but kind of has always been, although it feels more rampant lately. I don't know if that makes more sense. Like, I really need to deep dive onto that, but like this, when I heard, you know, Black women say they are tired and that, you know, the 92% are done, I heard and I saw you all, and I respect it. And us white folks here really need to take the lead and the charge, and we have the responsibility to make the changes. We made the system, we have to dismantle it and rebuild it better. It should never have been on, you know, the oppressed to make the changes. It should be at the hands of the oppressor, which as a whole we benefit from the system, even if we're not directly in the system, even though we can be impacted. There's a whole lot to it. Anyway, there's that. Then I read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This was also a phenomenal read. I don't know why I kept putting this one off. I had it on my TBR and I kept grabbing it from Libby, and then I was like, I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say I don't know. I kind of know because I knew it had to do with adoption. Maybe I just didn't want to deal with that as an adoptee, but the plot itself was really good, but the adoption part is really what stuck out to me. We had, you know, our two main characters, a mother and a daughter. vying for the biological mother of this child, wanting to get her back and deserving, and she did everything, right. And then we have everyone else in the town rooting for the foster parent to adopt the child. The child was Asian. The family, I believe in the book they were white, but if I'm not mistaken in the casting, and I'll cover this, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong, okay? If I'm not mistaken in the casting of the show by Reese Witherspoon, they were black. Not that it makes that much of a difference, but, they were rooting for the foster parents to adopt the little girl. And it really felt like majority of the people, and that's kind of how it feels like in real life, have these rose-colored glasses and don't understand the impact that adoption has and the trauma that it has on the child. And that, while this was more foster care to adopt situation than private infant adoption, there's still a lot to play, and that we are at higher risks. So there's a lot to that. All right. Next up was The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Another 5-star read. I first heard this story about through Mr. Ballin. I'm not gonna say he did it better. It was just he tells it differently in the sense of the theme. Like Mr. Ballin does like more of the video part of it, whereas and it's like shorter form versus Colson, who really like deep dives into the individual boys and what they're experiencing and the different races and stuff. So I want to make that clear. This is something that it's about the 60s scoop, and if you think the Underground Railroad was deep and emotional and moving, this was, I think it was a little bit harder for me to read and get through, to be honest. I felt like it was a little bit heavier. That's what I meant to say. Then I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel to The Hunger Games, and we have who will become President Snow as our main character. It was a phenomenal book. Really explains a lot of the concept of what the Hunger Games is and other moving parts, and kind of how President Snow was affected as a child. I still have a lot to say, so I'm gonna save it, but yeah, that was it. Then I read 1666 by Laura Chilton. I cannot get this book off my mind. I will be honest. This was an Indigenous read. This was by a... she wrote about her ancestors, two surviving women of the Potawatomi Massacre in 1666. They were two women who were enslaved, brought to Barbados, and this book covers their journey as being enslaved, escaping, coming back to America, living through the smallpox, and trying to reunite with their people. Well, they knew that the tribe didn't survive, but, other Indigenous communities. There was a lot to it. Very sad, very moving. I will say that there were times where it kind of got confusing which woman we were talking about. Like, sometimes I forgot which one we were talking about because one was slightly older than the other, but it was really good. And then we had The Spirit Run by Noah Alvarez. This is an Indigenous Latinx book, nonfiction. This is about his story running from... They started in Alaska, through Canada, and they were going to the tip of Argentina. And it was his way of reconnecting with his tribe that he had not grown around, and how he pushed his body, and also like the internal things that he had to go through, and external with the group of runners. the treatment that they had, not only like between themselves, but also by the people that they ended up having to rely on in each stop. So making that clear. Now, he personally did not run all the way to the tip of Argentina. He stopped, I think it was like Guatemala or somewhere in there. It was like halfway down. But he ran pretty far. He did majority of the running, so kudos to him. Then I read The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. This is the first book in the Bridgerton series. I have not watched the show, okay? Look, I know everyone loves it. I do plan on watching it. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm not the biggest historical romance reader. I will read it on occasion, but this makes me want to read the whole series and watch the show and compare it. I loved it. Okay. 5 stars. Then I read White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo. Nonfiction about race. I know, there's a lot of race books here. She is a white woman talking to white women about racism and everything that she learned and continues to learn through her journey. The next book in that series is Nice Racism, which I read back in December. Fantastic book. But she says, like, even, like I said, with So You Want to Talk About Race, right, that it is a reminder that no matter what you already know, we gotta do better, right? We gotta sit and journal. We gotta think about who we're talking with when we're talking about these topics. Just because you think you're an ally doesn't mean you should be talking to your Black, Latinx, LGBTQ, well, this is specifically about the Black community, but other marginalized communities about their struggles. They already know. They already go through it. Unless they bring it up, don't bring it up. Okay? We don't have to traumatize them. That was a great reminder. Then I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This was a cozy fantasy. I don't usually read cozy fantasy. This was really cute though, and I plan on reading Bookshops and Bone Dust next. It could have had a little bit more romance. just a little bit more. But it had found family, and while I'm not always the biggest found family is not always my favorite thing. I don't know how to explain that. I think it's the adoption part of me. I know it sounds weird, but like, if you know who I am and you know what I speak on, there's just a piece of me that's like, but this really, like, they were friends, but they became like a family. Like, it wasn't forced. And they came together, and it really showed that no matter what your past is, you can change your future. You can change your present. And to be kind to people, right? There were other bits and pieces, but that was like the premise, and I really enjoyed it. Alright, then I read True Gretch by Gretchen Whitmer. Now, I knew a little bit about Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Gretchen Whitmer. You know, she is the governor of Wisconsin. She was threatened by the Proud Boys to be kidnapped and tortured. And this book was her memoir of what she went through to get into politics, why she chose politics, and how she continued to show up for her people and be resistant. You know, even though she's scared, you know, standing up to these people and saying, no, you can't take the power. You know, not the power of her fear, right? But to say, like, hey, look, you can't do that. And, you know, I know not everyone's going to agree with Gretchen Whitmer, but really, like, what a woman to look up to in leadership. So, that's what I gotta say. But then, I read Fear by Bob Woodward, which talks about Trump's first presidency. Yeah. So, between this book and Enough by Cassidy Hutchinson, which I read back in 2024, it made me realize that while 2016 to 2020 was pretty horrible under his presidency, it is nowhere in comparison of how bad it's going to be from, 2025 to 2029. Okay? Like, nowhere. If we survive. If he lasts 4 years. Okay? And that's a big if. Not having that discussion with you guys, I'm just saying. But it really showed that even though there were people that don't always agree with my politics, they still realized that there were things that he wanted to do that were unconstitutional and fought against it for us. Okay? And we don't have those people. All we have are yes people, as far as we know. And that is terrifying. Alright, then I read The Eyes Were the Best Part by Monica Kim. This was the first Asian horror book I've ever read. I need to find out if she wrote more horror books because this was phenomenal. It was different, but like, it also kind of had me on my toes. There were bits and pieces of it that I was like, is this the bad person? Is this... Yeah. This was good. It wasn't just horror in the sense of like unaliving, but there was racism, there was classism, there was, internal issues that she had with herself, and, coming from an Asian family, like she explains that, and then how other people saw her, what she dealt with as a woman, all sorts of things. And I will say the books that were mentioned in this, she mentions that one of her characters read certain books, kind of like I've been doing, right? Reading certain books on race and feminism and all that. Just like I talked about with White Fragility and So You Want to Talk About Race, these books, this is exactly what he is doing in this book, right? He's using that knowledge to try to talk to her and get him on his side, right? Like, the ally, like, oh, I'm the good person, like, don't. But in reality, when he gets called out, in a sense, by her friend who is black, a black woman, right? He gets upset and he doesn't like her. He doesn't like the black friend. And, like, yeah. He's doing exactly what so many white people do. That's all I'm going to say. Alright. Then I read The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This one, I will be honest, I almost DNF'd this book. It took me a while to get to like maybe 60%, and then it got good. So I'm going to say that, at least in my opinion. I felt like it could have been shorter. I did like that we were going from present to past, and there was like this connection, and like this, our main character, well, one of our main characters, the present main character, I forgot her name, I apologize. I read this halfway through January at this point, so forget some names here. She is, going through things and trying to figure out who she wants to be and if she wants to divorce her husband and all this stuff. Meanwhile, she's like discovered this thing and she's getting into archaeology, and this is kind of what she's always wanted to do since she was young, and what she studied in college. She was a like history major or something like along those lines, or something like anthropology, archaeology, and this really helped her come to terms. Meanwhile, in the past, this is about a woman who helped other women because they're not allowed to be seen and do things, and they need potions, and it's a whole... But she ends up being a serial unaliver. Let's just put it that way. But it didn't feel like it was historical fiction and not horror, if that makes sense. Like, there were just bits and pieces of it. Anyway, then we have Number of the Stars by Lois Lowry. This is a must-read. This is about the Holocaust in the Netherlands and the family hiding another family and what they went through and how to protect themselves and so forth. It had been a while since I read this. First of all, I love Lois Lowry, but his work really hits deep and dark, and also a master writer. So then I read Mexican Goth by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This was another 5-star read. I will be honest, I kept looking at this book. Everyone kept recommending it. And there was something, I don't know, off-putting. Maybe it was, I think it was just the cover. Because, like, I didn't really know what it was about. I just knew it was a Latinx author. And it's been on my TBR, and I just wasn't, like, wanting to pick it up just yet. I don't know why. What a phenomenal book. The twists and turns of this book was... I need more of her, okay? I need more of her. Then I read another horror book, this one by a black author, so a black horror book, When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Now I will say this one started off slow. I was kind of aggravated with her writing. I personally love Alyssa Cole. So when I do read historical romances, she is one of the authors I tend to pick up. And I had really high hopes for When No One Is Watching, but I'll say I would rate it between 3 and 4 stars. Somewhere in there. I just felt like it was a little bit slow to get moving into, and there were, of course, there's going to be talks of race and classism and gentrification. But then once it got to the good parts, it got good. Okay? Like, it got good. Then I was like, oh, okay, like, now we're ramping up. Now there's things happening. Now we're noticing things. Like, then it started to make more sense, and then, bam. So, I do recommend it. I just think that, I don't know. I don't want to say it could have been faster in the beginning, but I feel like the introduction into our character and her arc maybe could have come a little bit sooner. And I say that not with when it has to do with her mother, but like everything else going around her. So I also felt like the way that she introduced our character was, I understand why she did it. I just don't necessarily agree. Like, could kind of been put in a different section of the book. I don't know, maybe. But like I said, I did enjoy it. Alright, moving on. Then I read The Root of Ice and Salt by Jose Luis Zarate. This was a Latinx queer book. This was interesting. This was, I wouldn't say pirates, but sailors, and he's the captain, and it was spicy, but also kind of interesting. I would give it 4 stars. It took, like, even though it was a kind of a shorter read for me, there were bits and pieces where I was like, I don't know about this, but I did enjoy it overall. Then I read Fireheart Tiger by Alec de Bodard, another 5-star read. It was a shorter one. This one also was just like a random pickup one that I found, and I was like, oh, it's a short read, like, let me just read it. I really enjoyed this, and I need a second book. Okay, that's all I have to say. Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Canas. This was an interesting read. I would say 3 stars. I honestly don't remember it as much as I probably should. But overall, when I read it, I enjoyed it. So, there were bits and pieces that, like, I feel like my attention was just going in and out. And that's just me. I don't think it was necessarily the book. So I am rating it 3 stars for now. It may go up when I go to, like, look at stuff. So if you see a different video and I say it's a different thing, go by that one. Okay. Then I read Becoming Kin by Patty Krawick. Nonfiction. Thought this was interesting. Indigenous read. And it's about reconnecting with your ancestors, with your tribe, right? Knowing that you're Indigenous and, like, working on going back to your roots. This is something that I, as an adoptee, has been trying to do. I've always known I'm Apache. My biological father is Apache. I'm obviously white. So that is part of who I knew that I was growing up. Like, it's on my records. But, you know, I think I have a soft spot in my heart for books exactly like that, because I feel that 100%. So 5 stars, of course. Then I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune by, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Ningvu. This one also 5 stars. Randomly picked this up through Libby, and I have no regrets. I need a second book. This one really, like, there was magic and history, and, you know, they ended up sitting down, our main character ends up sitting down with this old woman who worked with the queen. She was, like, part of her royal consort, and she became really, like, a close friend to her, and it's her telling her story to these young girls who are, like, history, like, I forgot what the word that they used in the book, but it was like, they write down all the history things. Like, they're supposed to be on their way to this event to record things, but they end up finding this place and, like, coming to this lady who's, like, telling them everything, and they're, like, writing everything down. So it was fascinating, and I think there's a book 2. I gotta check it out. Okay. Then I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. There were bits and pieces that I really enjoyed, and then there were bits and pieces where I felt like I didn't enjoy. I would say 3 stars. I don't really understand the full hype on it. It just kept reminding me of the movie Troy with, what's his name? Angelina Jolie's ex-husband. And I kept, like, picturing that, but sapphic. And I just, I don't know. Maybe that's my problem. Alright, then I read Decolonizing Palestine by Michi Rahib. This was a nonfiction book about the history of Palestine. Not so much what's currently happening, but what has been happening. And I really think that more people should read it. 5 stars. Then I read The Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas. 5 stars. Immediately 5 stars. YA fantasy, queer fantasy. I don't know what it is. Like, I start off the year strong with YA fantasy, especially queer. It's giving me life. It's giving me life. There is a book 2. I am reading it February, so you'll see that soon. It's like, and I said this in a review that I wrote on Instagram and all that, I would say it's similar to The Hunger Games with Gods, except that's an insult to this book. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love The Hunger Games, as you guys heard earlier in the video. I really enjoy it, but this was so good. It also had... Sorry about that. I was in the middle of talking, and then my phone decided to say, hey, you got no more storage, while I was filming. So, anyway. Where were we? Oh, I was talking about how our main character in the Sunbearer Trials is trans, and it talks about having, you know, feeling not themselves for many reasons. There were other things like classism, racism, of course. I absolutely love the book, and like I was saying, Celestial Monsters is the second book in the series, and I plan on reading it this month, being February, when I'm filming. Okay. Then I read The Comfy Cozy Witch's Guide to Everyday, I don't even remember the full title, by Jeannie Blonde. I apologize. I will say that this was 4 stars. I started listening to it, and then I ended up pausing it for a little bit. It was a good book, very informative, but I will say not good on audio, only because the information you are seeking from the book, at least in my opinion, while I do love nonfiction books, things like this, when you're meant to jot things down, journal things, take notes kind of thing, I don't find this kind of book to be great for audio use. That's not to say if you can do it, good for you. She does have a soothing voice, so I'll give her that. But it's about witchcraft, paganism, and how you can bring it into your everyday life and, you know, find how it kind of suits you, because there's different styles. Then I read Children of Anguish and Anarchy by Tommy Ademi. Tommy Ademi. This is the 3rd book in the Children of Blood and Bone series, which is going to be made into a movie. They just announced the cast. I'm so freaking excited. And of course, I know she's working on another book because I follow her and she's talking about writing. So, I know we're good. I absolutely love her work. YA fantasy, 5 stars, must read. Then I read Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmer. This is the 2nd book to her series, Indigenous Authors. Why can't I think of what the first book is? Oh, Braiding Sweetgrass. Sorry, guys. Braiding Sweetgrass. Then it's Gathering Moss, and then it's Serviceberry, which I'll be reading. Another excellent book. Another book that I would say probably not the best for audio. Again, because of the information. Again, the voice is soothing, great narration. It's just the information and the way that it's told, that it's something that it's more like you can zone out to, if that makes sense, instead of like fully paying attention, at least in my experience. But I did enjoy it. So I would say 4 stars. We'll say 4 stars. Then I read The Reckoning by Mary L. Trump. Dr. Mary L. Trump, specifically. You know, the niece of the current president. This was not where I thought it was going to go. I gave her 5 stars. There was a lot that she said that kind of repeats the other books that talk about race and history, and I thought that was really interesting. And she said, you know, she was talking about the history of our country, which, if you've read Stand from the Beginning, which I absolutely recommend, this kind of goes along the lines of that, as well as Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, that she kind of just reiterates what they both say in just a different manner, and how our country was kind of always going to go this route, but there was definitely a like significant uptick before her uncle was deciding to run. So then I have Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. Now this is a queer indigenous book. There were some bits and pieces that I felt a little bit uncomfortable with what he was doing, and I think that's just a very personal thing. But I did enjoy the perspective. You know, this Johnny going from, you know, living on the reservation to off the reservation, how he's treated, especially being queer, being a sex worker, all of that, right? So it definitely covers that, and I thought that was interesting. I think just some parts of it, it just felt like he wanted to, I don't know if I want to say degrade himself, humiliate himself. Maybe that's a kink, but it kind of felt that way in a weird way. Like that was the vibe I was getting. But hey, that's his kink. That's him. I'm not going to shame him for that. All right. Then the last book that I read in January was The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This was a Black queer book. This follows our main male character who comes into himself during college while he discovers drag. And so first of all, I want to say, drag queens, y'all are fabulous. You look far better than me. Performance, love you. And this was his way of, you know, being more authentic to himself and discovering all of those things and different parts of himself and feeling more comfortable with his femininity. And I thought that was really beautiful. And, you know, in this book, I want to say that while we do have a, you know, our main protagonist is a man, there are women who also do drag. And it was very clear in this book, and I absolutely loved it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Like I said, I read a lot of books, and let me tell you, I'm on a roll for February. So with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this, and I got a lot of book reviews to catch up on. I'm going to try not to use this space as my recording space, but sometimes it's going to happen, so it is what it is. Anyway, much love to you all, and I'll see you guys next time.